in the bottom of your Testament base, or the Ksav Yadam was Mimakam Acher, Mishtar Shekar of Arv Sabezin. So now we're going to go and clarify, right? We were talking about beforehand in the previous DAF, and we were talking about going ahead and being making a star with a star that's already in Basin. So now we're clarifying that when we talk about being making a star with a star that's in Basin, so it doesn't just mean that you have a star in Basin that's on the record in the Basin. It means that there's a star, as we'll see in the Gemara, there's a star in Basin that was brought to Basin. It was challenged in Basin. Basin went ahead and did all their research. They upheld the star, and then they put it into the records. So it's not just a din that I come to you and I say, I owe you money, or you owe me money, and you pay me the money, and then Basin takes the star. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, you owe me money. No, I don't. Basin does all their research. Basically, we could say for 2015, it's notarized by Basin, put into the records of Basin. Now when we come with another star, so now we're talking about that type of star is what we're talking about when we pull out the notarized star from Basin, and we can compare the signatures on this star to the signatures on that star. We don't need any human testimony, and therefore we're going to go ahead and we will be able to do it. Ein elu ne'amanim. So again, if we have Eidim from somewhere else, or the star in Basin, we have a Basin star that's already notarized, then when these Eidim who come and say, these are the signatures of X and Y, except they were puzzle when they signed, now we're not going to believe them, because again, even though it's Pesha Asa Pesha Hitir, just like by the regular guy who's coming and saying that these are his own signatures, we don't believe him because we don't need him, because we already have the other testimony from the other people, and therefore we're not going to believe them. What's the Gemara's obvious question? Okay, very nice you have it from other people, but now Lamaisa you have two Eidim that are coming and saying that these two signatures are false. So very nice, you're not going to use them and say Pesha Asa Pesha Hitter. Yeah, they don't have a time of Pesha Asa Pesha Hitter, so we're not going to believe them to say Anusim Hayu. But Lamaisa, right now, what do you have? You have two Eidim that are signed on a signature, two Eidim that are signed on a star, and you have it's already Mekim in Bezdin. Fine. But now you have two other Eidim that are coming and saying that those two signatures of Lamaisa are puzzle. Because they were Ktanim, they were Anusim, they were Psuleidus. So what do you do here? So how can you say Ein Elu Ne'amanim, that we're not going to believe the second set of witnesses? And you're going to let me collect with this document when I have two other witnesses? Yes, these two guys have been clarified by a notarized thing in Bezdin, but Lamaisa, I have two Eidim over here that are coming and saying, yeah, very nice, but these two Eidim were puzzle when they signed. So what do we do? So what does it mean Ein Elu Ne'amanim, the second set of Napalit? Umagbiin Bei Kishtar Ma'al, we're going to let you collect, we're going to let me collect with this star. V'amai, treyu trei ninu. You have 2 versus 2. And what should it be? Rashi says, treyu trei ninu. Eidei hashtar beis. The two that are on the star are 2 Eidim. And again, assuming that they were already clarified from somewhere else, either they came themselves or we have in Bezdin, let's say, we have a notarized other star. Ve'elu beis me'idim alei. But now the two that come that say shepsulam hayubos shah, so we have 2 versus 2. So what do you tell me? I'm not going to believe the second set of Eidim. Rav Sheisha. So Rav Sheisha says no. Zos omeres. You know what we learn from here? Hachasha tchilas hazamahi. That hachasha tchilas hazama. Now most of the Rishonim say it doesn't mean that contradiction is the beginning of hazama. It means that when you have hachash, when you have contradiction, there is an aspect of hazama in it. Now what's hachash and what's hazama? So let's just review. Hachasha is when you have one set of Eidim who say that X happened. And Hachasha is when the other set of Eidim say X did not happen. So you have one Eidim that says X happened, the other set of Eidim say that X did not happen. So what do you do? Each testimony is considered to be equal. These two say X happened, and these two say X didn't happen. Fine. What's Hazama? Hazama is when one set of Eidim say X happened, and it happened at this time, at this place. The second set of Eidim aren't saying that X didn't happen. They're saying X might have happened, but it's impossible that you saw X, because you were with us at that time and that date. So here it's not that there are equal testimony. What do we actually do in that case? We actually believe the second set of Eidim. Kasher zamam lasos, and we actually punish the first set of Eidim, and then if the first set of Eidim who were testifying were trying to kill somebody, then we're actually going to kill the first set of Eidim. Now what happens if the second set of Eidim are also hazama? Fine, that's a separate discussion. But the difference is that hachasha is basically 2 versus 2. X happened, X didn't happen. Here it's not that X happened and X didn't happen. X happened. X might have happened, but you're false Eidus. It's not that the testimony, it's that your testimony is false, not that X didn't happen. Fine. So in that case, kasher zaman. So what we're saying here is that over here you have 2 and 2. You basically have 2 Eidim coming and saying that this loan happened, because we signed on this loan. Now you have 2 other Eidim that are saying what? Seemingly not unclear. Is it hazama or hachasha? Is it that this loan didn't happen, or that it's not that you were with us, it's basically that this loan is not a real loan because of the fact that you were puzzled at the time. Again, these guys are not here to defend themselves. So what the Gemara is saying, regardless, is hachasha tchilas hazamahi, that in this case, it has an aspect of hazama to it. And the Gemara is clearly learning this as being a case of hachasha, where these two Eidim who are signed saying the loan happened, and these two Eidim who are not, who are here are saying the loan did not happen, because it wasn't a kosher loan. So he learns, Rav Sheshes learns, just like you can't be mezim eidim ela bifnam. That means two eidim who come to court and say it's impossible because they were with us. We don't punish the two eidim unless they're standing in front of us, because they have a chance to defend themselves. We're not going to say, okay, death penalty, and then go find them and kill them. We have to bring them to court, and they have to explain themselves why these two guys are coming and saying, you were with us. Were you really with them or you're not with them? And then we can have a whole trial. But just like we're not going to do hazama ela bifnehem, kach ein machishin esa eidim ela bifnehem. Fascinating. So too, we're not going to do hachasha on the eidim unless they're here. And therefore, when you have these two guys who signed on the paper, they're not in front of us now. When these two other guys say, yeah, but they are psulim, so what does the Gemara say? So the Gemara, the Brisa says that if we have them again, if these two guys are the ones that are saying these are good signatures, but they were anusim, then we're going to believe them. Peshatza, pesha hitir. But if we already have it, and we can compare it to a notarized document in Beis Din, so we've basically been able to be making the star, and now two other guys come and say, look, these guys you're right, you were making the star, but these guys were amnusim, they were ketanim, they were psulei edus. Lamaisa, just like we wouldn't believe them to call these guys liars for azama and punish them, so too we're not going to believe them to say that they were anusim, they were ketanim, they were psulei edus. And that's why he explains, the Gemara tells us, ein elu ne'amanim, that they're not believed, and seemingly I can go ahead and collect with this star. The Gemara is going to say, Amalei Rav Nachman, that's ridiculous. Ilu havu kamanu machishin lehu havu hachasha. That's ridiculous. If these two guys were here, if I signed on these documents and now I'm standing here in front of Beis Din, and these two guys come and say, you were psulei edus, you were ktanim, you were anusim, the Gemara says the halacha is that we're going to believe those two edim. So if they were standing here, we're going to believe them. Now that you're not standing here, we're not going to believe them? It's ridiculous. Not only are they not here, but if they were here, maybe they would have even admitted that they were ktanim, psulim. Maybe they didn't realize that they were related. Not that they were doing it on purpose. Maybe they didn't realize that they were related, right? You have that sometimes at a wedding, where they come and they say, warning for tonight. They come and they say, okay, Adim. So, anybody related? Oh my God, I am related. Yes, second cousin. Okay, you're off. Too bad. So, over here, maybe they didn't even realize, and they would have admitted. Mehimne, so we're going to believe them. So, again, it makes no sense, and you're not going to believe the second set of Adim. You would believe the second set of Adim if these two guys were standing in front of us. So, why are we not going to believe the second set of Adim? So, it can't be, says Rav Nachman, the way that you're explaining it, Rav Sheshes, that just like we don't do hazama if these two edim are not here, we're not going to do hachasha when these two edim are not here. And therefore, he says that when it says harei elu ein elu ne'amanim, it can't be what it means. Ela amar Rav Nachman, what does it mean? Oki trei lahadi treva oki mamona b'cheskas mari. Fascinating. So what does he say again? We have this star that I bring to Beis Din. We're able to be making it by a notarized star that we have in Beis Din. Okay, very nice. Now these two guys come and say, yeah, very nice, these are the signatures, and you know that these are the two people on the star, but they were anusim, they were ketanim, they were psulei edus at the time that they signed. So the Bryce over here says, ein elu ne'amanim. So Sheshes tries to explain ein elu ne'amanim because, again, I don't know, ein elu ne'amanim. So what did Rav Sheshes say? Ein elu ne'amanim, because you can't do hachasha shelo b'fanav. They're not in front of us. Rav Nachman says that's ridiculous. Of course you can do hachasha shelo b'fanav. Maybe hazama shelo b'fanav, but you could do hachasha shelo b'fanav. So what does it mean ein elu ne'amanim? It doesn't mean ein elu ne'amanim, says Rashi. Ein elu ne'amanim means we don't believe this second set of witnesses enough to rip up the star. But we also have to be choshesh that the second set of witnesses are right, and therefore we're not going to let me collect with that star. So it's like somewhere in between. I'm not going to be able to collect. According to the way the Rav Sheshes learned, I come here with these signatures that was notarized by Beis Din, and these guys come and say, these two guys signed, yes, but they were on Nusim Tanim Psulei Edus. According to Rav Sheshes, I can go ahead and collect with that star, because we're not going to believe these guys, because they can't do Hachasha Shelo B'fanav of the Edim. Comes along, Rav Nachman says, that's not true. They could do Hachasha. If these two Edim are standing here, then these guys could be Machish them, and then the star would be ripped up, seemingly. So how can you tell me that when they're not here, you can't do Hachasha? So it says, you're right, we have like a middle ground. We're saying that we're going to believe these guys enough that I can't go ahead and collect on it, because Eina Chanami, these two Eidim might be Psulei Edus, Ktanim, or Anusim. But at the same token, since the Maisa they did sign and it was notarized in Beis Din and they're not in front of us now, we're not going to believe these two guys enough to go ahead and say we're going to rip up the star. And I can hold on to my star. I can't collect on it now, but I can hold on it so that when they come eventually, when we're able actually to find these Eidim, and they come to Beis Din, maybe the two of them will have it out in Beis Din. I'll be able to bring the four Eidim into Beis Din and they'll fight it out. And if I can somehow prove that my two Eidim are telling the truth and these two Eidim that are being are not telling the truth, then Beis Din will rule, okay, now you can go ahead and collect with this document. So that's what Rav Nachman is saying, is that it's ridiculous to say that you're going to go ahead and not believe the second set of Eidim. So there's somewhere in between. We're going to believe them enough that I can't collect with it, but we're not going to believe them enough to make me rip up the star. Yeah? Shaila?
What's the point of not ripping up the star?
Because again, we can't assume, since these two guys are not in front of us, we can't assume that they're definitely not. We can't assume that they definitely were anusim, that they definitely were ketanim, that they definitely were psuleidos at the time. So we're going to wait to see if they eventually ever come. Again, we said, that's why we said vamesu doesn't necessarily mean that they're dead. If they're dead, they're dead. But vamesu means that they're not here now. So if they would eventually come to Beis Din, or obviously it's going to be in my best interest to bring them to Beis Din now. Lamaisa, I want to collect with this star. So I'm going to try to find them, bring them to Beis Din, and I'll let the four of them go at it, the two against the two, and we'll try to prove, obviously, I'm going to try to prove that these two were not anusim, they were not ketanim, they were not psuleidos, and we'll try to disprove the testimony of these two. But at the same time, we have two that are coming to court now. How am I going to be able to, Beis Din not going to let me collect on this thing if the two of them are saying that Lamaisa, this was anusim, ketanim, psuleidos? So it's somewhere in between. So Rav Nachman seems to make a lot of sense. Ella, what? And therefore, Oki Mamona Becheskes Mari. Therefore, you, who I'm trying to collect it from, is going to be able to collect your money. You're going to be able to hold on to your money. I'm trying to collect from you. I have to hold on to the star. You hold on to the money because you had the money. It was your chazaka. And therefore, I can't do anything until I can disprove the two Eidim that are basically disproving the two Eidim on my star. Midid have a nichse de Barshatia. There was a nichse of Barshatia. Not such a nice name. Basically, Barshatia means he was a shota. De Barshatia, I hope that's not what his parents called him. De Barshatia zavin nichse. Atu beitrei amikshu shota zavin, v'atu beitrei v'amikshu chalim zavin. So Barshatia sold a piece of land. Two Eidim come and said he sold it when he was a shota, in one of his main estates. V'atu beitrei v'amikshu chalim zavin. No, that day he was normal. So the question is, who do we believe? If he was normal that day, then the sale go through. If he was normal that day, then the sale doesn't go through. A shota can't sell something. Maravashi. So what are we going to say? Similar to our case over here, where you have 2 versus 2. These two Eidim, these two. And so what do we do? Oki trei lahadi trei. So we have to do the 2 against the 2 and 1. For oki mamona becheskes barshatia. Now you have to remember, this is interesting. What does that mean? Becheskes barshatia. He doesn't have the chazaka. The guy who he sold it to is now holding the land. Rashi explains the talking about land. So let's see. The Gemara is going to explain. We have a chazaka that Barshatia inherited this land from his father. And therefore the last known owner of this land is Barshatia. Now when you have 2 Eidim and come and say he sold it when he was normal, but you have 2 Eidim that are coming and saying he sold it when he was crazy, therefore we have to leave it in the chazaka of Barshatia to be choshesh that maybe he sold it when he was crazy. But that's only when he had a chazaka that he inherited from his father. If we don't have a chazaka that he inherited and he bought it at some point in his life, then what do we have to be worried about? Maybe when he bought it, he was a shota too. Ukshu shota zavin, and when he was a shota, he sold it, and therefore it needs to be who exactly is the chazaka now. Now the Gemara is not clear, but one can argue the chazaka is actually who? The guy who he originally bought it from, and maybe it shouldn't go back and like the two of us are fighting over it. The next thing we know, it's going to the third guy because he's going to say no. It's mine because when I sold it to him, he was already a shota. So again, the point is that, again, trey, when you have 2 or 2, just like our case, is a little bit of a different case, but just like 2 or 2, we're going to leave this document in my hands, but we're going to leave the money in your hands because there's a chazaka that it's in your hands. You're the last known one to have the chazaka. And even though I have the document here, Lamaisa, there are 2 Eidim that are coming and saying the document's not a legit document because Eidim are anusing tani psula edus. Therefore, we're going to leave it in your hands, but I can hold on to my star in case I could ever find those 2 Eidim on the star. But similarly, in this case of Barshatia, the last known owner, assuming that Barshatia inherited from his father, the last known owner was Barshatia. Therefore, when you have 2 that said he sold him when he was a shota, 2 that said he sold him when he was normal, we're going to leave it in Barshatia's hands because he's the last known owner. But Lamaisa, if we don't know that he inherited, and there's no chazaka that it belongs to him, then we have to be choshesh that maybe he bought it when he was a shota as well. So if he bought it when he was a shota as well, then the last known owner of the thing was the original owner. And therefore, in this case where we have 2 that said he sold it as a shota, and 2 that said that he sold it as a normal guy, we have to go back to the original chazaka and we have to say, no, it goes back to the original owner. Obviously, whatever money was transferred will go back. We have to assume it goes back to the original owner and he gets his property.
It's hard to necessarily say that he was normal or not. It's hard to diagnose.
Okay, in Hanami, that's why we're saying that unless we know that he had a chazaka from his father, we have to be choshesh that he wasn't normal, and that's why the money's going back to his thing. It doesn't seem to be the Svar of the Gemara. The Svar of the Gemara doesn't seem to be saying we're going back to him because he might not have been normal. The Svar of the Gemara is that we have 2 Eidim. That means if we know that he wasn't normal at some point, but right now we only have 2 Eidim that said he sold it when he was normal, so we're not going to be choshesh. Maybe he wasn't normal that day. The 2 Eidim said he sold it when he was normal. It's not a din that we're choshesh that he wasn't normal that day. It's that we have 2 Eidim that are saying he wasn't normal that day. When you have 2 versus 2, it needs to go back to the chazaka of who it belonged to.
I'm sorry, I was trying to say that the Eidim may have been wrong in their assessment.
In a chanami, but okay. The court seems to be choshesh that the Edom are not wrong in their assessments.
Okay.
Everybody's definition of crazy is different. Nobody thinks they're crazy. Amar Rabbi Yavahu. So Rav Avo argues, again, before we said according to Rav Sheshes, who we rejected, that you can't do Hazama when they're not here, you can't do Achasha when they're not here. Rav Nachman said that's ridiculous, and therefore Rav Avo makes a lot of sense. Means when we say you can't do Hazama shelo b'fneim, that doesn't even mean that you can't disprove them. You can disprove them when they're not here, you just can't punish them when they're not here. Not just that you can't punish them physically, obviously, but you can go ahead and give a din that they're punished when they're not here to defend themselves. But just like a regular case where you come and you say that these two Eidim are not, they were honest, whatever, so just like we could do Hachasha Shelo B'fneim, so again, we don't do Hazama Shelo B'fneim, but the Hachasha part of a Hazama we're going to do Shelo B'fneim. The part that says that this document is not a good document, we're going to do. The fact that we're going to punish them, that we're not going to go ahead and do. But again, it makes a lot more sense than what Rav Sheshes says Rav Avo. Amar Mar. Going back now to the pshat, but I think before we walked in here today, we thought that when we do kiyum shtaros, that when we're making a shtar, so we thought that, what does that mean? We thought that when you're making a shtar, so you go ahead, you compare it to a court document, and that's it. And the Gemara today added, no, it's not that you compare it to a document that the court has on file. So you have to compare it to a document that the court has on file that there was a problem raised with. They were able to go ahead and do their research, and then based on that document, which was quote-unquote notarized, now I can compare this document. It's not just a din that I went to collect a hava from you gave me the hava without any problems, the court took the document just to have it, and shalom Yisrael. That document we can't use, because again, who said that that document wasn't forged? Very nice, you gave me the money, but maybe that document was forged. It has to be a case where I went ahead and I said, you owe me money, you said I don't owe you money. Beis Din went ahead and did their whole research. They did their research, they found out that the document was actually a true document. You pay me the money, they stamp it, it's notarized, now it's in their records. Now when I come with another document, we can compare it to the notarized document of Beis Din. That's what we added today, that it needs to be notarized. So says the Gemara, Omar Mari, Meshadim Sheksav Yadim Huzeh, O Sheksav Yadim Yotzei Malkum Achem, Mishtar Shekara Lav Ira, V'Hofsak Beis Din, Einem Anim, Kara Lav Ira in, Lo Kara Lav Ira Lo. It's only if it was notarized. Again, if it just happens to be on file and nobody raised any problems with it, then we have to assume that maybe the original document was forged too. Misayei Leila Ravasi, this works with the Ravasi Dam, Ravasi says, Emek Kaimin Esashar, Mishtar Shekara Lav Ira, V'Hofsak Beis Din, etc. Amar Nahardai, and we'll see Nahardai is not arguing, they're just adding. Another possible way to make him a star is not just with a notarized star in Beis Din. Ein Mekaimin Esashar, you could also be Mekayim Shtar Mishtei KESUVOS. We have two KESUVOS. That means, again, I'm trying to bring this star, and I'm trying to say you owe me money. Now I need to be making the star. So I could go ahead and get two KESUVOS that have the same signatures of these two Eidim. If I can prove from the two KESUVOS that these are the same exact signatures, they look exactly the same, then I'm making my star. All mishtei sados, or from two sados. As long as the baalem ate it with 3 years peacefully. What does that mean? Mishtei sados. Look at Rashi. Me'idim eila im chatum al shnei shtaros acherim. Again, I'm bringing my document. I'm trying to be making it. So either I can be making it with a notarized document in Beis Din, or I can find 2 other documents that these Eidim signed on, and the example the Gemara gives is 2 KESUVOS that they signed on, which went through, or 2 sados. They signed on 2 transactions where somebody else sold property to somebody else. Therefore what? It's not just that they're on the documents. It's that they're on the documents, and the buyer of the field has been eating the fruits for the last 3 years. Why do we care? Because clearly if the buyer of the field has been eating the fruits for the last 3 years, then it was a legitimate sale, because or else the Baal, the original seller, would have gone ahead and raised a problem over the 3 years. If we see it's a legitimate sale, so we have 2 documents that were legitimate sales with these 2 signatures on them, so then I'm going to be able to take my third star, compare it to those 2 stars, which is with the same 2 Eidim on each, and we'll be able to be making my star. Says the Gemara, again, that's what it means. As long as sha'ach, it's not just that you find a star where they sold the sada. Sha'achlu malem gimel shama uveshofi. As long as the Baal who bought it has been eating for 3 years peacefully, we assume that those 2 stars are good. If those 2 stars are good, they're the equivalent to a notarized star in Beis Din. If 2 KESUVOS are good, then they're equivalent to a notarized star in Beis Din, and I can go ahead and be making my third star here with those. Amar of Shimi Barashi uviyotze mitachad yad acher v'miyad atzmo lo. Okay, obviously it has to be that these 2 documents that I brought, let's just use the documents from the Sada, for instance. These 2 documents have to be brought to Beis Din from somebody else. I can't bring them to Beis Din and say, look, I have my star here to collect, and it matches the same exact things as these 2 documents that I'm holding in my hand of these 2 Sados. What's wrong with that? I don't understand. What's the problem? So the problem is, what are we worried about? Because what happened? Yeah, very nice. These are real documents. These are real documents. Nobody's arguing. The Baal's been eating pears for the last 5 years. These are real documents. What happened? You were the lawyer. You have them in your house. What did you do? Well, you took one of the documents last night. You put them on the table. You took this document, and you traced the signatures over the documents. Very nice. Very nice. Nobody's arguing. These two documents are good. But you're going to come now, and you're going to be the one who's bringing this and saying, you owe me money. You're going to be the one to bring to Beis Din those two documents? It's ridiculous. But yeah, very nice. Those are legitimate documents, but you went ahead and you just forged a signature right on there. Says the Gemara, very nice. If I come and say, okay, my friend has them, so it sounds like the Gemara is not afraid that I have a friend who has the two documents who's going to let me look at them and trace them in his house. We don't have friends that are that mean. The friends are they're gonna protect us and not let us be over any surim. So if I bring the documents to Beis Din, the two and the one, and say, look, this one compares to these two, then we're not going to believe you because maybe you traced it. I says the Gemara, maybe we should be worried that when I bring this one, and then even if I say, okay, my friend come to Beis Din and bring the two that you have, maybe Lamaisa, I went to his house one day, I saw his ksuva on the wall. I'm not saying you should keep your ksuva on the wall, but if you have a ksuva on the wall, that's fine also. But I went and I saw the ksuva on the wall. I saw the signatures, and what did I do? I came home, I memorized the signatures, and I was able to trace them. I'm very artistic. I was able to trace the signatures exactly from memory. Says the Gemara, Kulei hai lo matzi mechavin. Not that somebody's not going to do that, but nobody's that good. There's no artist out there in the world that's that good that he can go to your house, see the ksuva, come home, and trace exactly what was on the ksuva that he saw on the wall. And therefore, if it comes from makom acher, again, we're not worried that your friend's going to be in part of the plan. And we're also not worried that you're going to be able to memorize it. Therefore, if you want to be making that stars, you have a few options. You can go ahead and have somebody else bring two ksuvas, somebody else bring two stari sados, or you can go ahead and compare it to the notarized one that's in Beis Din. Beautiful. Tana Rabbanan. Yes, somebody asked that also in the first year. Picture. There were no pictures back then. And even with a picture, you can't necessarily trace it as well as you would like, even in 2015. Tana Rabbanan. Kosev Adam Edusu al Ashtaru Meid Aleh Afilu Achar Kamashanim. New topic. No staros. It says the word star. Forget about the word star a second. We're talking about now. You're walking on York Boulevard. You see somebody come out of the parking lot, making a left turn. You see somebody coming down York Boulevard, going straight, boom, there's an accident, chas v'shalom. Now, what happens? Well, you're a good citizen, but you also don't want to necessarily get involved. You don't want to go to court. So what do? You're going to go home. You're going to write down all the details of the accident so that you have them in your records. But at the end of the day, you don't want to go ahead and get involved and testify if you don't have to, etc., for whatever reason. But now there is a chance, because somebody might have seen you, there's a chance that they might come to your door one day, and they're going to say, okay, you got to come to court. They're going to give you a summons to come to court. So the question now is, if you go home and you write down the details, and now you're called to court. So we know that the Torah tells us that it needs to be mipihem, it needs to be from your mouth, v'lo mipi ksavim. You can't bring this testimony to court and hand it in. But the question is now, when you're called to court, so seemingly, again, if it's yesterday or if it's tomorrow, then okay, maybe you'll be able to testify. But let's say you're called to court in 5 years from now. So you're not going to remember every detail. We don't remember what we had for breakfast yesterday. How are we going to remember what happened at the thing? So the question is, what happens if you go home now and you write down all the details? Now you're called to court. Can you testify in court based on, not necessarily what you remember, but based on the details that you had written down when you came home from seeing the accident? That's what the Gemara is going to deal with over here. Tana Rabbanan. Kosev Adam Edusu al Ashtaru Meid Aleh Afilu Achar Kamashanim. So the Gemara says yes. You can write down your edus on a star. Again, it's not an official document. This is the index cards at home. And when they come to call you, even after many years, as the Gemara is going to say later, 60 years, the Gemara is going to say. Later on, we're going to give an example. 60 years, if they call even after 60 years, even 100 years later, if they come to call you, you can go ahead and be made based on what's on the document. It's not exactly clear what Rav Huna and Rav Yochanan are arguing about, but Rav Huna says, Rashi says, when they come to your door and they say, we want you to come testify, so it needs to be that you remember a little bit about the case, and now you can go ahead and use your notes to sort of get your memory going and remember all the details. Rav Yochanan Amar Af Bishein Zocher Me'atzmo. Rav Yochanan seems to say, Rashi, Ela Achar Shara Bishtar Not to Meliva V'Niskar. It sounds like Rav Yochanan is saying that you don't even have to remember anything about the case. You just have to have the files there. When they come to you and say, I want you to come testify, so you don't have to even remember that you saw the accident. It's just that when you see the star, you go into your files and you pull up all the accidents that you've seen in your life. You pull up the star, and now all of a sudden you look at the star, and now the details start coming back to you. Even that's enough. Again, according to the first opinion, you sort of have to have some details before you even see the star. You have to remember the accident at least. According to Rav Huna, you don't have to even remember. According to Rav Yochanan, you don't have to remember the accident. Just when you go and you look at the piece of paper, you have to be able to jog your memory a little bit. Amar Rabba. And the Gemara says, the Rashi says, Shalom Nisham and Kokash Maskirin Lo Niskar, Aval Eino Niskar Lagamri Lo. But even according to Rav Yochanan, you need to remember a little bit.
How do you know?
Well, again, it sounds to be a little bit subjective. You have to be able to remember a little bit. Well, when you look at the document and you look at this like, did I write this?
No, but
that means you don't remember anything. What?
Exactly, that's my question. How do we know when they knew?
Okay, so the Gemara is going to say, again, Abishin Zocher Me'atzmo. Amar Rabba Shmamina Midi Rabbi Yochanan. It seems like we passing like Rabbi Yochanan, Alpha Pisha in Zocher Me'atzmo. Again, it seems like we're passing like Rabbi Yochanan, and Lamaisa, you remember based on the star. Again, how do we know that it didn't forget about? How do we know that you didn't forget about everything? So seemingly that's...
He knows what the star is. It could be that he remembers the thing.
Right, so it sounds like as long as he's able to remember the thing, he's able to find the star, because he obviously knows that something happened, it sounds like that would be enough. Amar Rabba, Shmami Nami Rabbi Yochanan, Honey Bay trade the Yodi Sadusa. So we imply from here that if you have two guys, forget about a star, you have two guys who know Eidos, Uman Shichad Minaya, and one guy forgets the Eidos, Mitkar Chad L'Chavri. The second guy can go ahead and remind him of the Eidos, and as long as he remembers, once he's reminded, then he can testify. So the Gemara says, what happens if the Baal Din is the one who reminds him? I'm bringing the star, and you don't remember, but don't worry, come, I'll remind you what happened. You remember, we were together, and I lent the guy money. Again, the guy's very persuasive, so what happens? Rav Chavira Mar Afilu Atzmo, that's fine. Mar Breder Rashi Amar Atzmo Lo B'Hilchasa Atzmo Lo. It can't be the guy who's bringing the document that's reminding you about the thing, because Lamaisa, that's already too much of a stretch. But says the Gemara something very interesting. If the aid is a Talmud Chacham, he's a Tzor B'mei Rabbanan, then Afilu Atzmo. Then even if the Baal Din reminds him, because what we know that the Talmud Chacham, a great guy, he's not going to go ahead and testify unless he's really reminded and he really remembers the details. He's not going to let some guy who's exaggerating the Baal Din, he's not going to let some guy persuade him to go ahead and testify something that he didn't actually see. We all know people like this who know how to persuade people very well. But if it's a Tzur B'mei Rabbanan, then he's not going to testify. And once he testifies, we assume that what? We assume that he testifies only based on that which he remembers. We have a case where Rav Ashi knew some testimony that dealt with Rav Kahana. Amar Lei. So Rav Kahana went over to Rav Ashi and said, Midokir Mar Hai Sadusa. Rav Ashi, do you remember what? You remember when we were together? Amalei lo. Rav Ashi says, I don't remember nothing. Rav Kahana says, come on, man, I'm going to remind you. We were together, and you were there when the guy borrowed $1 million from me. Amalei lo yadan. Rav Ashi says, I don't know what you're talking about. Lesof itka Rav Ashi asilei. Finally, Rav Ashi went and he testified. Chazi Rav Kahana dava mechsam. Amazing. This is a Talmud Chacham. This is a true Talmud Chacham. Rav Kahana was bothered that Rav Ashi went ahead and testified on his behalf, considering that when he went over to Rav Ashi and said, do you remember? Rav Ashi didn't remember. Amar Leis, Rav Ashi said, no. Misvaras alecha kasam china. You think that I'm going to be somech? You think that when I testified it was based on what you told me? No. Maybe you helped me, but at the end of the day, the testimony that I gave was based on one thing and one thing only. My memory of the case. Once I remembered the details, then I went ahead again, proving that by a Talmud Chacham we can believe him even when he's prodded by the guy who's a Baal Din, who's involved in the case, because he's not going to testify unless he remembers himself the details of the case. New case. Okay. Tanan Hassam. We have a case. And this is going to deal with mounds. You find a mound of dirt. So do you have to be choshesh if you find a mound of dirt, that there's a dead body or a piece of somebody or a bone underneath the thing, and you have to assume that it's going to make you tameh if you walk on top of it. It's not hasam. Hatlulolios. If you have a mound, hakrovos bein le'ir bein lederech, no matter where it is, if it's close to the city or close to the street. Echad chadasos ve'echad yishenos, whether it's new or whether it's old. We'll see what that means in the Gemara. Tmeos, it's tameh. So when is it not going to be tameh? Seems like it's always tameh. Harachokos, if it's far away from the city or far away from the derech, and it's chadashot, and it's new to horot, then it's tar, because again, if it was a mound with somebody who's dead, then we would know about it. But yesheno tmeot, even if it's far away, if it's old, we have to be choshesh that it's tameh, that maybe somebody buried the body there, nobody here remembers, but maybe there's actually a body underneath the mound. Eizel hikrova, what does it mean that it's close, that we have to be choshesh, whether it's new or old? If it's close, says the Gemara, chamishim ama, 50 ama. Ve'eizel hu yeshana, what's old? Shishim shana, 60 years. So again, in order for it to be not assumed, in order to not assume that it is that there's a dead body there and that you're going to be tameh, if you go over it, it needs to be less than 60 years old and needs to be far away from, and it needs to be close to the it needs to be far away, it needs to be more than 50 amos away, and it needs to be less than 60 years old. Div Rabbi Meir.
How do we know how old it is?
Kenes kasha the says Rabbi Yehuda Omer Krova shein krova mena. I don't know. You have records. You have people who are 60 years old.
Where did they mark that?
They might have marked. Well, first of all, you can measure now from the city. Again, how do you know exactly that at the time this is where the city was? That's a good question. It's not going to be clear from the Gemara exactly. But 60 years old, I'm saying you have people that are 70 years old, and that's a question. How long are we going to trust somebody who remembers? It's a good question. I was just joking. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Krova she'ein krova himena. Krova means that it's the closest. Seemingly, even if it's more than 50 away, that's still karov if it's the closest, because we have to assume that if that's the closest mound, then maybe somebody went there and buried. Yeshena she'ein adam zochra. And old means that nobody remembers it, even if it's more than 60. Okay. What's the problem? 10 amas is 17 feet. 10 amas is 17, 20 feet, whatever. Right?
Yes,
It's not that much thing. It's about 20 feet. My year or my derech. Again, 50 amas would be like 100, whatever, 100 something. My year or my derech. What's an ear and what's a derech? So Eli Ma'ir, Ir Mamish, Derech, Mamish. So if we're talking about an actual city or an actual Derech, Misafka, Mim, Maskin, and Tuma, are we going to make every single mound to be Tameh that's near an ear, near a Derech? This is fascinating. We're talking about the Talmud Bavli here, and yet we're talking about Eretz Yisrael. We're saying the pretext, the assumption is that anywhere in Eretz Yisrael, even a mound is going to be Tahor. Fascinating. So it can't be talking about within any city, or near any derech. In general, it sounds like if you find a mound, it sounds like, again, it's not here, it's talking about Eretz Yisrael, but it sounds like in Bavel Ein Achanami, we can use these calculations. But in Eretz Yisrael, since the pretext is that everywhere is tahar, because we want to make people be able to walk as much as possible in Eretz Yisrael, so we're saying the only time that it's going to be a problem in Eretz Yisrael is if it's Rav Zera, ir hasmucha lebeis hakvaros v'derech beis hakvaros. Again, in Bavel, it seems like we use these calculations no matter what. By any ear, by any derech. Within 50 amos of the ear, within 50 amos of the derech, 60 years, etc. But in Eretz Yisrael, we have to assume that everywhere is tahor. If you have an ear that's near a beis hakvaros, near a funeral, near a cemetery, or a derech, or a street or a walkway that walks from a cemetery, then you have to put in these rules. What's pshat with these rules? About 50 feet, etc., 50 amos. Bishlama derech beis hakvaros de zimnin de misrame ben hashmashos umakru kever betal. Fascinating. I understand why you need to be choshesh for 50 amos off of a derech going to a cemetery. Why? Because sometimes you're going to be doing a funeral on Friday afternoon and you're going to be on the way to the cemetery and you're going to miscalculate the amount of time and you're going to realize, we don't have time to get home for Shabbos, so what are we going to do? We're going to go off of the derech on the way to the cemetery and we're just going to bury the body right there. But they're not going to go so far off. Within 50 amos, you have to be choshesh when you're walking on a path to a cemetery in Eretz Yisrael. If you see a mound within 50 amos on either side of the road, you have to be choshesh that they ran out of time over on Erev Shabbos and they ended up burying. Again, even then, seemingly, even then, if it's chadash, it would be a problem. Even if you remember that there was construction or something, it sounds like chadash, you have to be choshesh. That's what the Gemara seems to say. But that makes sense if you have a derech. If you have a city that's near a cemetery. So what do I need to be worried about? 50 amos from the 50 amos from the field. Lamaisa, if you're going to bury somebody, you're going to go to the cemetery and bury them. What do I have to be worried that they bury them 50 amos out of the city? No. You have to be worried that there are nashim who have a miscarriage and they're going to be embarrassed to go ahead and bring it to the cemetery because they don't want people to know. So they're going to go, and within 50 amos, they're not going to go more than 50 amos, as we'll see, because it's dangerous. So if it has to go more than 50 amos, then they're just going to call a man, and once they're telling somebody, they might as well go to the Beis HaKfaros. But if there's a woman who miscarries and she's embarrassed to make a whole big to-do about it, so what's she going to do? She'll walk somewhere within 50 amos from the city, even though it's near the Beis HaKfaros. She'll walk less than 50 amos and she'll bury. Or if you have a mukashchin who loses a limb, he's going to go ahead and bury his limb. He's embarrassed. He's going to go ahead and bury his limb within 50. Now again, this is interesting because really you should say the same thing in Eretz Yisrael. But we're saying no, by a regular city we can't be choshesh because again, it sounds like we want so much to be able to walk on Eretz Yisrael, even though this seemingly is a good possibility there also. It sounds like we want so much for people to be able to walk on Eretz Yisrael that we're not going to make the gzera. But in Bavel, or seemingly over here, even in Eretz Yisrael, if you're dealing with a city near a Beis HaKvaros, so then again, it's hard to understand exactly why it should make a difference. The derech I understand the pshat that they went ahead and they were on the way to bury somebody on Erev Shabbos on Friday afternoon. But you can have a miscarriage in a city that's not near a Beis HaKvaros too. But it sounds like the Gemara is only choshesh by a city that's near a Beis HaKvaros, so the woman's not going to want to go to the Beis HaKvaros. She's actually going to bury her herself, and therefore if you see a mound within 50 amos in a city that's near a Beis HaKvaros in Eretz Yisrael, you have to be choshesh that it's actually the body of a nefel, somebody that was miscarried, a little baby, and therefore if you walk there, you're not allowed to walk there, and if you do walk there, you have to assume that it was a dead body in your tummy.
This is counterintuitive when you think of Chutzarts, where Rov is William, therefore there's no Tumas Amaze. So you would say, therefore, in Chutzarts, that I can be less strict, but in Eretz Yisrael, where
Right.
Rov is
Right.
Jews, so I have to worry about Tumas Amaze.
So it's interesting. Again, the Gemara seems to be not dealing with worried about Tumas Meis. The Gemara seems to be dealing with the ability to walk in the land of Israel.
The Iker problem is Tumas Amaze.
Yeah, that's interesting. So Ad Chamisha Mama Azla Ihi Lechuda Tvei Dabra Inish Bahada Ulebeis HaKvaros Azla. If she's going to have to walk more than 50 amos, then she's going to just go get a man to come with her to the Beis HaKvaros. Hilkach Tuma Be'eretz Yisrael Lo Machzakin, and therefore we don't assume that there's Tamei in Eretz Yisrael. And again, for these specific scenarios, this is what you'll have to be choshesh. So again, it comes out that in Chutz La'aretz, seemingly, again, you have to see the Rishonim, but it comes out that seemingly in Chutz La'aretz, you need to be choshesh by any city or by any derech. You need to be choshesh within 50 amos, whether it's new or whether it's old. Once it's more than 50 amos, then you need to be choshesh still if it's older than 60 years. But if it's within 60 years and it's further than 50 amos, then one can assume that you would know about it, and therefore you don't have to be choshesh for it. But in Eretz Yisrael, you don't have to be choshesh anywhere, it sounds like, even near a city, even near a derech, even within 50 amos. You see a mound in Eretz Yisrael, you can assume it's fine. But if you see a mound within 50 amos of a derech on the way to a cemetery in Eretz Yisrael, then you need to be choshesh that maybe they went ahead and buried the body on the way to a funeral on Friday afternoon. And if you see one within an ear, 50 amos of an ear that's near a cemetery, then you need to assume that the mother went ahead and buried the thing. If it's more than 50 amos away, then you can assume it's fine, assuming that it is chadash and not yeshana. And if it's yeshana, again, it's hard to understand why, but if it's yeshana, you need to be choshesh even more than 50 amos away, for other reasons, etc. The Gemara doesn't seem to say. Maybe there was another city there, etc. Unclear. But it doesn't seem to me why, at first glance, you'd have to be choshesh more than 50 amos away, based on as far as that you're saying. No funeral procession is going to go more than 50 amos away, and no mother is going to go more than 50 amos away, so what should it make a difference? It sounds like no, once we have like the pretext to worry a little bit, so then we're going to be worried, and we're going to do like an extra gzeira and say, Lamaisa, it needs to be a new one, or else an old one, even more than 50 amos away, off of the path or out of the city, you're going to have to be worried as well. What does this have to do with anything we're talking about? Excellent question. Amar Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says, what?
60 years.
60 years. I gave it away. That's not fair. Shema Mina, may Rabbi Meir, we learned from Rabbi Meir, who's giving you this whole thing that an old one is 60 years, and that again, it needs to be within 60 years and outside of 50 amos in order to be able to say that it's not going to be metameyu. Shema Mina Rabbi Meir, hai sadusa, that in general, again, this doesn't seem to be, to me, even though it's not clear also, it doesn't seem to me that this is talking about when you have the stuff written down on a piece of paper. It sounds like when there is nothing written down, hai sahidusa at shitin shanin mitgar. It sounds like if you have something written down, then that could be la'ol mayad. That could be up to 120, up to 500. And, you know, your memory is reminded a little bit by looking at the piece of paper, and then you can testify even after 150. It sounds like over here what he's trying to prove is that when you don't have any papers written down. So now, Lamaisa, we don't have any papers written down. How long can you go ahead? Is there any statute of limitations for you to be able to testify if you don't have any papers written down? Says the Gemara, Shmamina Rabbi Meir Haisadusat Shitin Shanim Mitkar. Even though we don't remember what we had for breakfast yesterday, up to 60 years, we're allowed to go ahead and testify on something that we saw. Tvei lo mitkar. You can't testify more than 60 years ago. Velohi. It's not true, says the Gemara. Hasam hu delo ram yaleh. No. The 60 years over there is because nobody in particular is paying attention to that mound. It doesn't affect anybody specifically. And therefore we assume that within 60 years somebody will remember, somebody was around, they didn't die, etc. Whatever the reason is, within 60 years we assume that that mound is considered to be new. However, in this case, if I didn't write anything down, if I saw something 100 years ago, Lamaisa, since I saw it, and I was part of the thing and it affected me, however it affected me, I'm going to remember even 100 years later. It says the Gemara, Avahacha keva deram yaleh afilu tuva nami lo. Yafilu tuvanami. That even 100 years later, if you see something and they come and they ask you to testify, so it's going to be considered that you can testify even 100 years later. So there is no statute of limitations according to the Gemara. Mishnah. Let's just say the Mishnah. Ze Omer, another case. Back to the document. We have the document here. I bring it to Beis Din, and now I need to do Mekim Stars. Ze Omer, Zek Sav Yadi, V'Zek Sav Yado Shel Chaverai, V'Ze Omer, Zek Sav Yadi, V'Zek Sav Yado Shel Chaverai, Elu Ne'amanim. So we bring this thing to Beis Din, and I need to be making it. Now, there's no star that's notarized in Beis Din, there's no KESUVOS, there's no nothing like that. But each one of the Eidim, we said, if you have two other Eidim that come and say, these are good Eidim, so then we believe them. Let's say I come and say, mine is this is my signature, and that's his signature. And you come and say, this is my signature, that's his signature. Perfect, that's beautiful, because again, I have two Eidim, my own and him, and he has two Eidim, his and mine. Divrei Rabbi. Sorry, Harei Nemanim. Zeh Omer Zek Sav Yadi v'Zeh Omer Zek Sav Yadi Tzrichim L'tzarif Imam Acher Divrei Rabbi. But Rabbi says what? If I come and say this is my signature, and he comes and says this is my signature, then we still need one person each to clarify and say this is our signature, because we each need two Eidim to come. We can count as one of them, but we need another Eid for each of us. Each of us needs another Eid to say this is our signature. The Chachamim say Einam Tzrichim L'tzarif Imam Acher. We don't need somebody else. Elam Neman Adam Lomar Zek Sav Yadi. When somebody comes and says this is my signature, that's enough. That's the equivalent of two Eidim. It's not even, doesn't sound like it's even testimony. But when I come and say this is my signature, we believe me. When he comes and says this is my signature, we believe him. And therefore, based on those two guys, we could be making the star.